It's booting up right now, and it says we are live. So thank you, Dean, for showing up. This is the Anti-Spam Guy podcast, episode 1, where we are untangling the chaos, specifically the digital chaos and chaos around the internet. And of course, it all starts with spam, where spam is what we see and what we all just are desperate to get rid of. And then we also are battling several other problems, which we can see hopefully here. I guess I should put this up on the screen. Does that appear? And are related. So that's what our main goal is here on the podcast. And to tackle the privacy and security problem, that's why I'm excited to have Dean Sapp here. And I know you've been on a podcast with me before, but this is the routine format that I will actually finally continue to do. And let me just introduce Dean. He is a repeat startup builder and an angel investor, and he's spoken at over 60, maybe 70, I don't know how many conferences now. And he has been and is currently a chief information security officer. And so he's been securing the assets of multi-billion-dollar companies, and he brings definitely a lot of privacy and cybersecurity experience and expertise, not to mention he's one of the friendliest guys around. So with that, Dean, thank you for being on the show and bringing your experience and expertise to help shed some light on this
Happy
topic.
to be here, Rob. Thank you for the invitation, and happy to talk about ways we can help people protect themselves and untangle some chaos.
Yes, absolutely. So let's dive in a little bit just with the chaos. Like, what do we even mean? And um, what I'm curious from you, like, what is your perspective on the privacy and security? So cybercrime and privacy issues are obviously a problem. Um, would you say those are simple problems or complex problems?
I would say at
Why?
some levels they're simple because they're targeting people, and we're creatures of habit. We like things to be easy. We like things to be fast, and we get a little impatient when we have to wait. So, from the perspective of as an adversary, I've done quite a few penetration tests. I've been a professional penetration tester as part of my career path, and ultimately I go after those human attributes of being curious or being impatient, wanting something quickly, wanting a quick reward. And because of that, many professional hackers, professional criminals, they do the same thing. They go after people, and that people, know that people are going to be getting lots and lots of email. And in those emails are many phishing emails, lots of spam, lots of advertisements that they don't want, things that they don't necessarily want. But because there's so much of it, so much volume, it gets difficult for someone to discern what's really an authorized message, and is it really something that they're interested in purchasing? Is it from a company that they trust? So there's a lot of factors there, because the bad guys will emulate those Microsoft domains that are spelled incorrectly. They're doing what's called typo squatting, where there's like one character off, right? Or lookalike domains. I think we've all seen them. So really, it is quite challenging, even for people who are trained in what to look for. So it's much more difficult for a regular consumer.
So, yeah, thank you. So, basically, what I'm hearing you say is, like you said at the very beginning, it's both complex or simple. I'm sorry, it's both simple and it's complex at the same time. And what I heard you say was so you mentioned like spam, the way I say it is it's the tip of the iceberg. But you mentioned the data economy and the attention economy. Like people are sending spam and attacking people and invading their privacy because of they're motivated to get our data because then they can sell it. They can sell it to advertisers, they can sell it to cyber criminals and so forth. And you from what I remember is you just mentioned that you can you mentioned advertisers, and you mentioned now I don't even remember all of the ones that you just mentioned, but you mentioned like so many different things. And so that's where it gets complex, right? Is because to solve it, would you say that? Would you so to solve it, would you say it's both simple and complex, just like the problem is? Or
I think it certainly can be. I mean, if you've ever gone to your junk folder and you realize a lot of the mail that you want is actually in the junk folder, you're waiting on a proposal, you're waiting on something, and then you don't see it, and then you have to go digging for it, and then you get things you don't want in your inbox. So it really is somewhat complex because the technologies that are available to most people don't solve that problem well. I would say the accuracy is poor, and that it exposes you to risk because you can click on an email, and if that email is laden with malware or a URL that's been poisoned or any number of attacks, now you're exposing yourself, thinking that you're doing something that's legitimate. So it is both complex. It is simple in that it still targets people and our behaviors, but it's not something that any of the largest email companies in the world have successfully navigated.
yeah, so I the thing that comes up to my mind is it's extremely difficult to solve spam in isolation. It's difficult to solve privacy in isolation or security because each privacy has many different surface level examples of violations of our privacy. And then cybercrime has many different types of cybercrime. So, how do you actually solve the whole thing when it includes so many different varieties? So, there are many different abstraction levels of, say, the underlying motivation. So, if we just pick, you get a spam email, and we don't know if it's a link to a virus, right, or malware, or we don't know if it's from an advertiser and it's trying to track us, or maybe it's just from a friend. And so, how do you think, in terms of solving it in isolation, like how do you think the existing world and all of the solutions that are currently trying to solve privacy and cybercrime, how do you think they're trying to go about it? And well, I guess I'm suggesting that they're doing it in isolation. They're trying to solve just privacy or cybercrime. But
Sure.
how do you think they could, and do you agree with me that if they attempted to address all of the different issues, like the motivations of why advertisers even send spam, or or the motivations of who has access to our data and stuff like that, if they addressed all the different pieces, do you think that would actually solve or at least significantly address?
Well, I'll say that it's hard to know, hard to predict the future. Oh, if I wish I could, maybe I'd be better off. But I would say that the methods that have been traditionally used, so DMARC, DKIM, SPF, these are all ways to try to protect the group of users that you want to get emails from, and have rules about what happens if someone shouldn't be sending you a message. Is it blocked? Is it quarantined? Do you have someone who has to go, a human has to go look at it and say, yes, this is an authorized piece of email, or things like that. So those are the current systems, and they simply aren't very effective. I even tried to turn on encrypted email on an account I was testing with, and then most of the people couldn't open the emails, or if they could open it, they couldn't read it. It was supposed to come with a one-time token to let them authenticate and install a certificate. But at the end of the day, it varied. Success varied by the browser they were using, their email provider, whether or not they were working together. There were so many complexities that I ended up just having to turn it off on that test account because it was causing more harm than good. So I think the short answer is no, industry hasn't really addressed this effectively, and they don't understand, what the consumer really wants to see. They don't even ask, right? Your email provider doesn't ask you, "Hey, do you want to get these emails from the Red Cross? Do you want to get these emails to go donate some time for some service projects?" Who are the marketing companies you accept email that you want to be sold to, right? Are you interested in a new car? I know I can type in a new car in my browser and I get like 4,000 emails from car manufacturers around the world, but I didn't
Yeah.
even say I was really interested in buying a car, right? So they don't know the consumer. They try to build patterns about what a consumer might want, but ultimately you have no ability to say, I was just kidding. I really don't want those 4,000 emails.
You're like, I'm just kidding. I was just looking about a car because someone mentioned it, and then they think that you want to buy it and you're in the market for a car. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. So again, you just spouted off a whole list of complexities, and all you were talking about is email. So I think that basically what you're saying is, I mean, you mentioned the lack of data because an email provider, they don't know what you consider to be a spam or wanted email, right? And
Right.
then you said they don't normally ask you. I've seen emails where they, or Gmail every, like all the time. Uh, I probably at least once a week, I would see a little question on there. It says, "You haven't clicked on this or an email from this sender in a long time. Do you still want emails?" So it does ask me, and it asks me about, it's like all the time. And then they're throwing ads in my email. And I've even noticed that the number of ads that are visible on the row, of the inbox, that is increasing. So they keep pushing more and more ads, and then in the promotions tab, they're now showing me more. Like they're selecting particular emails. I don't even know why they're selecting particular emails from particular vendors. They must have relationships with them to promote those specific emails within our inbox, which to me is crazy that they have access to data and partnerships with other companies and we have no control.
Yeah, it's
Just like,
actually pretty frustrating.
yeah, yeah, it's really frustrating, for sure. So we have multiple layers there that in just email alone, you have to, there's spam, there's advertisers, there's what browser you're using, what email provider you're using. Then there's in end-to-end encryption. We all want that. We want read receipts. Either we want to block them, or we want people to know, or we want to know when other people read. But there are lots of problems I see just within email. So that's part of the chaos. And I bring that up because that's chaos that we see. And chaos, I just view as a monster, and it wants to confuse us. It wants us to have our privacy violated, and it wants us to be censored and be misinformed and be stalked and have other people make money off of it. It just wants all this stuff because that's what it does. And that's where we're at in the world right now. So,
Yeah. I was just going to say, ultimately, it just boils down to money in one form or another, right? They
yeah.
either want to monetize information about you by selling to you, or they want to sell your data to other people to make money. They want to get you to click on stuff because they get paid for each click ad, irrespective of the value to you. It's all about the value to whoever is trying to monopolize your data and to monetize it.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree with that. And that brings us into a good segue into the identity agent platform because just to transition our conversation into that. So we're talking about all this chaos and how we have just with email alone all of these different features like encryption and read receipts and um, financial incentives and stuff like that. Then if you apply that to phone communication and social media, and then you apply it to any other way of communicating on the internet, it's just overwhelming how many different problems there are. But it comes back to fundamental systems that I think need to be in place. And the number one is our data is scattered all across the internet, which is why there's so much chaos. So in order to under resolve that and fix the chaos, we need to bring or implement a universal protocol type based system where you have a way to bring all of your data in one place so you can see it and you know who has it, what is going on with it, where it's at, why, when, how, and for how much, if you even share any of it. And you know, we've discussed that with the identity agent platform, and I did update the design since you've last seen it, and hopefully it's a lot more interesting and, let's see, understandable, I guess. Let's see if I can figure out how to share the screen. I'm not sharing the screen right now, am I?
No, I saw it for a minute.
Oh, did you? Okay. Well, if I can't figure it out, well, I can do it this way. So this is the identity agent ecosystem. And this is a system that instead of us not knowing who we can trust, being confused, and just everything that we just said, like being in complete utter chaos, this is a system where when all the different businesses and companies and anyone who wants to join, when they join this system of exchanging data on the internet, such as with email, you know, if an email provider uses this system, if they become a legal entity and they provide their own identity agent that connects with individuals' identity agents, then this would solve, you know, ideally we'd love to solve as many problems as we can, but what I'm curious about from your perspective is with privacy and security. I'd love to get your input on how privacy and security is improved through this. So maybe if we run through it really briefly, does that work? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, and I can even lay some groundwork as to why,
Yeah,
privacy
please
is so
do.
important. I mean, if you think about how data is managed today, there are a large number of data brokers, I would say. I mean, the folks like Experian or Equifax or TransUnion or Epsilon, these are companies that have profiles on you. But there are so many places where data is bought and sold and transacted that, number one, it's very difficult to make sure that the data is accurate, right? It's very, very difficult to clean the data up. If someone says something about you, or if you are a victim of identity theft, very hard to go back and clean up all of those myriad of places on the internet where someone has something about you, and their inability to verify if it's accurate or not is critical. So I think the whole idea of this identity agent ecosystem is having a place that an individual person, or in Europe, a data subject, would be able to say, "This is me. This is my electronic identity on the internet, and this is reliable and trustworthy." And so that any bank, anyone that's wishing to do a small transaction, Facebook Marketplace, or any KSL marketplace, any place that you're transacting, someone can see who you are and then have a very high confidence. You're not a bot. You're not some fake identity or some email that's been spoofed, and that it's really the person that you're intending to do business with or to transact with, right? So that at its highest element, it's just having a much higher level of verification and authentication of who someone says they are.
Yeah, I'd love to dive into that specific one really quick just to make it very clear what it is we're talking about, because you just talked about one of the services or systems of within the identity agent ecosystem. So each person has their own identity agent who acts on their behalf, but then you were talking about identity authentication and verification. So there are of course different types of verification, but with human authentication, one of the services would be the grape score, which we don't need to get into right now, but it's a unique way that enables the authentication of each human with as high as 99.999 or 100, even 100% accuracy in one moment of time. But that's just one service within the identity agent platform system of services, and there are over 20. And since we're talking about verification, the transaction verification, like once you have known identities, then which is what you just mentioned, and maybe you were talking about transaction verification too, but once you have known identities, anytime they interact with someone, how do we know and trust that the the transactions they do are untampered with later on? And that's where the blockchain element of transaction verification is extremely important, at least from my perspective. Do you have anything to
Yeah,
add about
I
that?
I would say that, well, blockchain's a beautiful thing because it basically allows you to prove that the transaction has been completed and it's irrevocable. You can never go back and delete something off the blockchain. All you can do is update a new transaction, and it's permutated through all of the blockchain servers around the world. It's time stamped, so everybody knows if a transaction occurred, it's
Yeah.
authentic, right? And the beautiful thing about the grape score, I think everybody wants to be able to say, hey, what is the percentage likelihood that this deal's real? Like my wife and I sold some couple of trees off of Facebook Marketplace the other day, and we probably had three or four that said, yes, love to buy your trees. We'll send you $500, which is way more than you're asking for them. You just send us back $200 and we'll come pick up the trees, right? I'm like, I would love to know with a grape score. Oh, they're at 12%. This is probably not a deal I should do, right? Versus if someone's been verified with their email, they've been verified with a bank account or an identity provider, other methods that we have come to trust. Someone has personally verified them. It's much easier for me to trust somebody if someone else I know has said, yeah, this is Bob. Bob's good to go. He loves trees. He's got some cash, right?
Yeah.
And so now my grape score on Bob is 90% or something high. I'm like, okay, this is going to not be a waste of my time, but it's also going to help me transact and get rid of the trees that my wife told me she wanted me to throw away, 3 months ago. So it's all about verifying what that the people that you think you're talking to in cyberspace or next door are really who they are, who they say they are.
Yeah, and along those lines, the repurposability of the grape score is what I think is really helpful there. But obviously, it can't be repurposable if no one uses it or it's not accepted anywhere. So that's where we are right now, in this podcast, explaining what the benefits are, at least just in a casual way, to untangle the chaos where we literally, every time we do any transaction, even clicking an email or going to a website or even meeting someone face to face, we don't know if any of those people or links or any person on the other end, we have no idea if they are real or legitimate. And this having a identity confidence score solves that because it's repurposable and usable for anything. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I
that
agree,
would
and it's
totally
it's
solve your
really
problem in the
totally
Facebook.
would help, right?
Yeah,
And it just gives you more assurances and more comfort that you're not going to get robbed. Actually, I had
yeah,
a friend that happened to. They went to go sell a smartphone, and they met up with someone, and they were held at gunpoint. So you never want that kind of stuff to happen. And if you have a reputation score that's reliable, you can stay away, and your kids can stay away from dangerous situations.
yes. And you just brought up another thing that I had it in my mind. What was it? Now I can't remember it. Oh well,
All good.
it'll come back to me. So in terms of let me pull back up this identity agent platform. At some point I'll figure out how to not have to redo this every time. I know I did it before.
If only technology was as easy as the identity agent ecosystem.
I know, right? And I'm sure it's easy once you know, but it's not easy to do live on this. So we have all these different services, and that could be a conversation forever. That's why I'm doing a live discussion similar to how we're doing a podcast. My goal is to have a podcast every week so that, today I'm talking with you and we're talking about privacy and security. And then next week we'll talk about something else with another expert within one of those problems, maybe about misinformation or censorship or the data economy or et cetera. And then over time, as we talk with all of the different experts within each of these problem areas, we can also talk about the solution and piece together why doing it this way solves each of the separate problems, but collectively together within this one single ecosystem, which I think is essential for everyone to be able to be on the same page about how it works. Because that's our main
Right.
goal, is we're not trying to hide anything. And I think that this should be the identity agent platform code should be as open, not open source, but just public source or public. I think there's a word for public code where it's visible, but people don't use it to create their own version, but it's visible, so it's transparent. Is it? What's the correct terminology? Are
I
you
might
familiar?
call that well, it's kind of like a combination between like crowdsourced and private, because you want people to solicit feedback and to provide their be able to see it so they understand how it works. Actually, I'm not sure what the term is for that.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's public source or something like that, but whatever it is, that's what needs to happen for this platform to be trusted. Is they need to, like, anyone needs to be able to see how the code works, not that they have to understand exactly how you are authenticating or anyone else, because you should be able to have your own settings of how you authenticate or where you store your data. Those are all the controls that each individual user will be able to manage. But even before we get to all the systems, I think it's such a simple concept that there are, at least in my mind, and please let me know if you agree, but in my mind, there are really only two types of people who use the internet, and that's individuals and then legally organized entities. And you could argue there are IoT devices and stuff like that, but I think they are a derivative of an individual or a legally organized entity's identity. So I think that boils down to there are two different people that or entities that use the internet that I would consider internet users. So I just want to touch base on that. Do you think it's pretty simple and straightforward, or have you experienced even that being a problem where people create, you know, many different identities?
I think that is problematic. Anyone who's signed up for a platform, pick LinkedIn or X, or you decide. I know I've signed up multiple times for multiple platforms, and they're all me, but I can't remember the passwords or the reset questions, and I can't get them to delete it because I can't prove it's me. So, in some respects,
Yeah.
the only way that that's going to ever disappear is if I don't use it for 3 years and it times out and they just nuke it. So that combination of entities is really challenging because there often are not enough verifiers that say, "Hey, you already signed up for this profile. Are you sure you really want another one?" So that duplicity in the internet's a real problem when it comes to accounts, and it's also a problem for the companies that are selling a service or offering a service because it's wasting bandwidth, CPU, compute, cloud storage. Having all of these duplicates when they're really the same person can also be expensive. So I'd
Yeah, it
say that,
causes.
yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say that. So that duplicity really is a problem from both managing a single identity, a single source of truth, and from a cost perspective.
Yeah, so the only thing I was just going to carry on with what you were saying, and the duplicity, it even increases customer service requests, because I don't know how many times I've had to contact someone and say, "Hey, I can't find my account," or "I created one, but then, there's a problem," and they're like, "Well, you have another account," or, or "I had settings," or "My payment method was saved on another account," and or a business account versus a personal account. And even on X, where I have like multiple different personal and business accounts, um, it gets very confusing when you have multiple personal accounts because you're only one person in real life. So why do we
Yep.
have so many identities, digital identities for just me on the internet?
No, that's a great point. It's often because we don't remember them all, or we we don't use
That's
the
true.
platforms enough. It's not part of who we are, and so it's just sort of a tangential. Oh yeah, I want to go look at something on Facebook or check some scores on ESPN or what have you. So I think that duplicity problem just multiplies by the number of online accounts and online places you go to do business or to live your life the way that you want to.
Yeah.
So it is certainly an issue, and I think that it's not going to go away. And one of the biggest problems is many of these providers, they don't have mechanisms. Hey, I'd like you to just combine those together for me. There
Yeah.
often isn't an easy way to combine. And then if you had transactions, you're likely going to lose them because they don't span. Like if I'm doing my taxes right now and I'm trying to find data from online marketing places and things I've done, and when you bought one or even your spouse buys one and they're not linked together in any way, you just run into a lot of chaos.
Yeah. That I didn't see. Even on the corporate side, the enterprise side, trying to get all of your data from all of the different sources and identities. So it could be the same source, but then the identity that's tied to that data source could also be, have duplicates. And yeah, it just causes, I could see how that on the enterprise level, that would cause even, it just comes down to money.
Yeah, time and money, we lose both with all of that duplication.
Yeah. So in terms of, so I just wanted to go through I'm sure we could talk more about users, but I just want to talk about the governance side of things. And then, so the governance, and then also, then we could talk a little bit more about the services. So in terms of the governance, how many different ways of governing data do you think exist? And do you think it's a problem, or like in terms of chaos, is it a chaotic scenario
Yes,
ecosystem?
definitely. You can look at online digital rights or online privacy rights, and chaos is the perfect term because in the United States, there's not a governing privacy policy or directive. So every state has their own statements. Now, many of them are modeled after California, the California Consumer Privacy Rights Act. CCPA was the first iteration, then they revised it to CPRA, and they're trying to establish guidelines. And then some states have adopted it. Some states have said, "Well, we like most of it, but we got to change this part over here." And just keeping track of it. Utah has their own. Many of the states in the United States have their own version. And then if you're talking about customers in Europe, the GDPR takes precedence, but their definition of a data subject or a individual person can be different than how we define it in the United States or in Canada or other places. So the one singular truth about privacy is it depends on where you are. Privacy on a nude beach in France is completely different than privacy online. And you
That's true.
just have to understand that it's somewhat subject to change and your expectations and or your lack of expectations. I think anybody who opens up a web browser kind of understands they're giving up stuff for to get stuff. If the product is free, my friend Boyd McKinnon used to say, if a product is free, you are the product, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
so just understanding that you're giving up privacy, you're getting up your some of your browser habits, some of your favorite things you like to go to do, you're going to give that information up when you're browsing on most web browsers.
Yeah. You keep bringing up money, and I know I've mentioned it a couple times, but I really think the entire existing chaotic ecosystem that exists of how data is governed, how users exist, all the different services like authentication and blockchain. And there are so many different services and setups and policies that it all is just governed by who's making money and motivated to do what. And the only
Make
ones
more
that
of
get
it.
adopted, what's that?
Sorry, they're just incentivized to make more of it by their
Yeah,
shareholders or their owners at the expense of the people that they're making the money off of.
exactly. And I see the people who are making money are owners and shareholders of major corporations and government bodies, and they're all doing what's interesting or in their interest, and they're doing what they think is best for people, but from their perspective. And what needs to happen is people need to have control, because we're just like little, peons as individuals. Even the owners of these companies that are making lots of money, they are individually, like as an individual, they don't have control of their data, so
Right.
they're still affected, and we're all just cast aside because the major corporations and governments are making these decisions about how many identities we have, how our data is governed, and what services we use. So I think it's extremely important to follow the mantra of innovation over regulation. And if you could build a system whereby people are naturally financially incentivized to use a system where everyone has control over their data, then that'll be far more powerful than any other. Like, that's what will actually take over, untangle the chaos, basically. When you can align the financial motives of a system to untangle the chaos, then I think that's what will actually end up working. But that's just my theory. Any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I agree. I would say that a financial incentive. I mean, I as a data subject or person, I would pay money to protect my information. I mean, I have credit monitoring. I have all these account locks on my finances and things because so many people have tried to steal money from me or tried to steal my identity or what have you, and so I would pay for it. But if you have an ecosystem where each person gets to decide what kinds of ads they want to see, what kind of emails they want to receive, really removing the whole idea of just unsolicited spam and turning that into solicited emails that are targeted, because I would love to know when the flowers and the chocolates go on sale for Valentine's Day. Getting that to me in advance would be great because it would help me remember something I should be remembering anyway. And it likely can get me a deal for my significant other that is important. So that kind of proactive commentary or relationship would be welcomed, but I don't want 50,000 of these messages for trips I'm not going to take, or apparel I would never wear. And maybe they're trying to sell it to me so I would buy it for someone else, and that's okay too. But they would clearly don't know me very well because my wife has to pick out her own stuff because I mess it up every time.
Yeah.
So, just knowing, it's back to how do you help the consumers and the merchants have a very useful and proactive relationship. And if you could pay the consumer to get the kind of emails that they want, and then the businesses are getting qualified leads from people who really do like their products, then you've got this really perfect blend of a way to protect your privacy, ensure that you're being marketed what you want to be marketed. Everybody's saving time. We don't always duplicate accounts and wasted messages and wasted time reading them, and unsubscribing from 30,000 messages every year or what have you.
Yeah. And you're saying that people basically get what they want. Like, you get messages because it's something for a topic or event or something that you want. But here's the challenge that I've already encountered and that we've encountered at Grape ID, which is a story for another time. But the existing chaotic system of privacy is so chaotic that they're trying to protect people's data. But what ends up happening that I've seen is even just allowing the user to access their own data through a third party ends up triggering privacy issues. And then it blocks the user from accessing their data because it apparently doesn't adhere to the privacy policies of a third party. And when you only have a company battle, like a small company battling against like a Google, so that the individual can rightfully get a hold of their own data, then it becomes nearly impossible because the big company says, oh, you are not following the privacy policy. And then therefore you can't access your data as a user through a third party. Even
Yeah.
if it's an open source or even just getting your data on your own, you have to request it, and then you get. I'm sure you've done it where you get like a spreadsheet or some sort of file that, as a consumer, you're like, "What in the world is that?" It's just a bunch of cells and data set, just a bunch of data, and you don't even know what to do with it. So they definitely don't make it easy.
No, they don't. And even had a friend that had some things that were unfavorable about them posted. And, if you don't have an attorney or have power of attorney to represent someone who's non-technical, it took us about 12 months going out to every single data warehouse on the planet and following their process to be removed or to be updated or to get it current and to say, hey, this is all incorrect. And all of the iterations where it had been cloned to other websites and over things. And it literally took us a year to help her get her information under control, so there are things that were not accurate were removed, and her reputation suffered, and it was really hard on her because people, let's be honest, aren't always nice, and they don't always
Yeah.
say things or take pictures of people where they are authorized to do so, and then they put terrible memes underneath it, or we have a pretty horrible online bullying mentality, and so to take a year to clean something up, that's ridiculous, right? Having a single source of truth, like what you're talking about, one place where it's authorized, makes it so much easier to control that data and making sure it's correct.
Yeah, so in the case of that person, if you have, let's just say someone takes a photo of you and you're like making some awkward pose and then they say that you're doing something illegal. So in that case, if they post it on social media, we're they may be fighting in the attention economy where they're trying to make fun of you, and we always know fear-based or things that are polarizing, they capture people's attention. So then the algorithms increase the virality of it, and then that person suffers, so then they probably lose contracts or some sort of you know negative effect on them, and then their only retribution is to be able to hire someone like you or a third party to then go find all the sources, but then it could be copied, and finding where all the sources are of that data, even if you find it, there's no guarantee. I'm sure that you would say there's no guarantee people can just put them back on servers, um, because of the chaos. And then, so that's where, in terms of a solution, in order to prevent that, what I'm thinking is if you had a credential verification, so any legit content that you produce that's authorized by you, there at least needs to be a way where you can see legitimate content. And once you are verified through the authentication, the grape score, like we talk about, then combined with the blockchain, you can create verifiable credentials that then anytime you authorize a photo to be out there, then there would be a seal of approval and you can verify it with the blockchain. And then let's say someone still takes a photo and puts it out somewhere. If you can actively have all businesses, especially social media and email companies that are showing the content, actively search for your images via your identity agent and then notify you if someone's using your image, then you will be able to track content being used on any other platform. Those two things alone, in my mind, would be a game changer. But what are your thoughts on something like that, or how would you envision it?
Yep, no, I agree, and this can hit home for some of the folks listening to the podcast, but I've seen young women and young men where they have been, pretty viciously, having their likeness altered, and then in things doing things, robbing a bank or doing things that were not in their character, but because people thought it was funny, and then, like you said, it went viral, and it's actually impacted a lot of their ability to really interact socially, and ultimately there's been some really really tragic cases where they ended up taking their own lives. And so it's very real. As a parent, I have five kiddos and a stepson, and I love them dearly. And if I knew something like that was happening, I would spend as much of the time and resource I had, but I also would know I have to engage lawyers. I have to go to, I have to figure out if any of this is outside the United States. Do we have any chance of getting a company in Russia to agree to take down these images? It's pretty slim, right?
Yeah.
So, but being able to control that through, any image, any data, being able to search it through a single directory of truth, like the Grape Score, would make it, as a father, it'd make it a lot more appealing to me, be able to find things and to dispute things. When I say, no, this is the actual identity for my child, here are the images that we have authorized, these are the ones that are associated with their account, they verify who they are as a person. Anything else is not authorized. Anything else, and then maybe you would be able to go to law enforcement or other places where they have authority to take it down, or so forth, without it being so hard and so expensive. That's really where we are today.
Yeah, it opens the door for so many new ways of thinking about this, because as you were saying that, I just thought, just like email by default is delivered and then they have to filter it out, whatever they expect to be email spam, by simply blocking everything by default and only letting authorized, legitimate emails based on the credentials or grape score, or allow lists and block lists and contact lists. That alone will likely eliminate most of spam that exists. But if you apply that same concept, instead of filtering out, you filter in spam. But if you apply that to the images that any, like Facebook or X, if you just say no image of anyone that has a recognizable face that can be matched with an identity agent, no image of anyone's face can be posted unless it's authorized, or at least their agent is notified. That way they immediately know and can immediately block it, or at least, if they don't own it, then at least they can be notified of it, because I believe they at least have the right, even if they don't own the image.
Mm-hmm.
But then that it opens up a whole nother area of discussion that of course we can't go down right now. But yeah, it does. Anyway, I was thinking about that it just opens up the door so that there are so many other ways where we can completely protect and get control of our data and our images, that it's exciting to me.
Yeah, I mean, no one's successfully done it before, so it's opportunity. That's a pretty significant challenge that you're undertaking, but it ultimately will do a lot of good, and I think it'll save a lot of consumers money. It'll help protect people with their privacy. It gives them more choices, gives you the ability to choose, what happens in your life. Whereas today, we don't really get to choose a lot of what happens online, with what people say to us, or what people send to us, or how they use our likeness. And unfortunately, we just don't have the same level of privacy that I think we should have,
Hmm.
and is protected by the Constitution.
Absolutely. So since we are going to cap this out at an hour, and there are two other things that I would like to mention, just to wrap this up, and that has to do with the actual identity agent platform. So the centralized software and then the decentralized computing. So I want to ask from a privacy perspective. I think the discussion around the centralized software suite, which is basically, if you have all of your data in one place, then you need one place where you can see it and where you can interact with anyone else. And the centralized software suite is just an app and a browser extension, basically a plugin that can go into any sort of interface that's provided via SDK or API. So a user can centrally access that anywhere on the internet if they connect with the identity agent ecosystem. But do you have any comments on that? Because I feel like, for in terms of privacy and security, is there a perspective you have on that? Having a centralized interface
Yeah,
to access your
sure.
data from a privacy and security perspective?
Yeah, well, the system is decentralized today, and it's very, very difficult to control your information and who owns it and to opt out, right?
And
A
just to
central,
clarify, when you say the system, you're talking about the interface that you use to manage your data, right?
yeah, I would say that there really isn't an interface today. You have to go to every website, every data broker, every service, and
Yeah.
you have to try to control those terms to the best of your ability. So it's very difficult, and that's what I mean. Is the way that the internet, the way that online brokers and accounts and services and apps work, is it's totally decentralized. So having a centralized place where you can give instructions, and then you can have those data consumers and data vendors, they can adopt that connection to the one source of truth, and that would
Yes.
give both privacy and data sovereignty back to people, and make our lives more simple.
Yes. I I've never really flipped that around, so I'm glad you added that, because I've never really thought about the fact that currently we live in a decentralized interface. And I say that because, just like you said, when you go to PayPal, you have an interface that PayPal provides, and then you manage, certain personal information and payment. When you go to, Amazon and McDonald's app or whatever it is, you have all of these decentralized, scattered, chaotic mess of interfaces that everyone creates separately to manage the same information, essentially, which is your
Right.
name, your address, your payment information,
Who you
etc.
are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So okay, so absolutely. And then from a privacy and security perspective, I assume obviously it's more private and secure having a centralized software suite, or do you see any privacy vulnerabilities with that?
Well, as long as it is well protected, having your data in one place. I mean, we have Fort Knox for a reason. It's a large military base that has certain functionality and designed to protect, valuable assets. And we might get a tour in the next few weeks if things go a certain way.
Yeah,
So,
politically.
as long as the controls built around that source of truth are effective, then it's actually a lower risk, because instead of having to worry about the security of your data in 50 places, I think I have 130 something online accounts, and I probably get one notification or two a year that my data has been compromised, and they're going to give me free identity theft protection for a year, and a check for 27 cents after the class action lawsuit's over with, right? My data is actually worth more than 27 cents, but after you take all the legal fees out, there's not a whole lot left for the people actually impacted.
Yeah.
So yes, I would go all day for a secure, centralized repository, because then you can control the privacy rules, the security of the data, and how it's shared.
Okay, so I would summarize that as the actual user interface, not the code and the data, not the data behind it, but just the interface and maybe the code that writes the
Yeah,
interface. That
that's right.
there's no privacy and security issue really with that, as long as it's in a secure environment and there are variables, but it can be secure. But then what you're talking about is the data that is accessed through that centralized interface. That has
Yes.
to, of course, be secured and adhere to the policies created by a coalition and all of the participating companies and or organized legal entities and individuals according to a bill of rights that outlines what exactly we're fighting for here.
That's right. And then by overlaying that with the decentralized blockchain network that's made up of all of these different servers around the world that
Yes.
verify each change, and they update or they append the data to the blockchain, now you've got, irrefutable proof that you had you opted into certain things, or you agreed to certain data being changed or shared. Blockchain verifies that process and making sure it's accurate.
Yeah, and with the on the note of the decentralized computing, so there is this notion that, well, it's I think it's a fact that if you send data to a third party server, the owner of that hardware that is the server could read the data that's being processed, right? In an un in a not that it's necessarily happening all the time, but in the example of nation states, or if someone wants to, if they're motivated, they could read that data that goes through the CPU. That's my
Yeah,
understanding. Is that
yeah.
yours?
If they have access to the what's called an HSM, the hardware security module,
Yeah,
or if it's in transit over the internet, if there's not proper encryption, then often the data is eavesdropped, and they are able to listen to your communications and your channels. And that's why you see a lot of apps recently have been adding privacy, like WhatsApp is adding they say end-to-end encryption, or there are other apps like Signal that have been doing this for years with end-to-end encryption.
yeah,
But it's not universal, and it's not known or widely used. So until you have a platform like you're suggesting, where you can enforce that for your customers or for the users of the platform, they're largely unprotected. It's like sending postcards everywhere. If somebody happens to see it, they can read it.
yeah, yeah. So because there's a small chance, it seems like most people will not, like, people who are into the privacy and security, they would not necessarily understand, or they would not necessarily trust. Let me rephrase this. People who are into privacy and security, who really are familiar with it, they would not innately trust, say, North Korea processing the computing of my personal data. Or, I just don't think most people would do that. But if there was a way, which there is, and I think like the new technology of confidential computing is where anyone around the world could provide a confidential computing node, and then it privately uh, computes the data, and it doesn't know where it's coming from or what it is because it can't read it. But then that would be a way, when it's decentralized, that you could have a centralized software suite, which is this. So you could have a centralized software suite that sends data to a data gateway that you control, and then all of the computing is done via a decentralized computing network, kind of like the decentralized apps or dApps. But I think it might be a little different because it would be processed with confidential computing. That way, I would we'd have to look at the data, but I think there would be a 0% chance, or very insignificant chance that anyone would ever be able to hack your data. Because I always get the question, in this system, if someone gets your data, you know, are you screwed, basically? And with this setup, that's why we have it so that the computing is decentralized, so that no single entity has control over what is being done with the data. And do you have any thoughts on that setup?
Yeah, I would just say that the whole goal, as I understand it, is to make it more difficult for anyone who's unauthorized to be able to see the data, and
Yeah.
building in sort of that defense in depth approach and layers helps you to do that. So I think it any system can be defended with the proper steps, and any system can be breached with the wrong steps. So it's just a matter of making sure that we have the right protections in place.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I know we're right at time. So, with that, I know we're trying to create a system that's a universal protocol that everyone understands and can trust. And so I know we went through the three different segments of the identity agent ecosystem: the types of users, the governance mechanisms. Perhaps we didn't talk about the Bill of Rights and Identity Agent Coalition, but I think it's we can talk about that later. And then we discuss the services. So thank you very much for providing your input. And as usual, I just I love the additional insights, and we'll be taking some clips out of this and putting it on social media as well. So, any last comments?
Yep. Thank you for having me on the show, and appreciate the hard work you're putting into protecting people online.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Dean.
Okay.
You have a
Bye-bye.
fantastic day.
All right.